Okay, I was born April 22nd in 1947 at the Mock Clinic in Prairie Grove, Arkansas. My mother was Jeanette Leopard Venable, and my father was Lacey Bean Venable. Okay, I have a brother named David Carl Venable. My parents were divorced in 1959, and in 1960 my father married Justina May Hill. They had 2 children, Robert Lacey Venable and James Richard Venable, and Justina also had a son by another marriage. His name is Jimmy Lee Haskett. I grew up on the Venable farm in Summers, and until I was 5, we lived in the house that my great-grandfather, Richard Bruner Venable, built. That year, my father built the house that I live in now, but my brother and I were still at the old house almost daily to visit with my grandparents or staying with them until Mom and Daddy got home from work. And Mom worked at Plus Poultry in Siloam Springs and later at Tittles in Lincoln. A couple years later we moved to Tulsa, and Daddy got a job with Carnation Milk there, and Mother worked at various restaurants and things like that. My brother and I still got to spend a lot of time in Summers. They would bring us over as soon as school was out in the spring, and we would spend the entire summer with my grandmother at the old house. My grandfather passed away the first winter that we were in Tulsa. My connection to Cincinnati is through my great-grandmother, Mary Elizabeth Barclay Gibson. She was the daughter of William Poston Barclay, and they lived east of Cincinnati. I don't know where they lived prior to that. Mary Elizabeth was born January 15th of 1848, married Samuel Gibson March 7th, 1872, and died on July 15th of 1919. She and Samuel lived on a farm near Ballard Creek, northeast of Summers, and their house was the original site of the Silva Post Office. My mother also lived on the C Place when she was a teenager. And I'm not sure exactly when the Barclay family moved to the Cincinnati area, but William was granted title to his land in 1917. My great-grandfather Richard Bruner Venable came to the Summers area after he served in the Army of the Confederacy during the Civil War, and I don't have an exact date on that either, but he made application for a 40-acre homestead with the land office in Harrison, and it was granted in 1876. I remember a lot of the older people in the community. We had several relatives there. Uncle John and Aunt T, John was my grandmother's brother, lived in the little brick house south of the old church. Uncle Harvey and Aunt Annie lived on what is now North Street, just a couple of blocks up from the church. And then we had Uncle Henry and Aunt Annie, my grandmother's sister, lived in Lincoln. And on Sunday afternoons, they usually met at one house or another and had Sunday dinner after church, and oh, could those women cook. Me and my brother loved those dinners because nobody told us we couldn't have seconds, and if somebody started to say we couldn't, somebody else said, "You let those kids have all they want." I started school in Lincoln, and my Aunt Anna Venable was my first teacher, but it was during the first few months of my second grade year that we moved to Tulsa, and it was a different school every year over there. Mama liked to move.
But then did you come back to Lincoln to go to school after you got older?
After Mom and Daddy divorced, they brought me and David back over here, or sent us to live with Uncle Bill and Aunt Anna, and we stayed with them until Daddy remarried. And during that time, we went to school in Lincoln. After he got married, we went to Eufaula, where Justina's parents lived. We were over there 6 or 8 months and came back over here, and I went to school then through the first half of my 11th grade year, when I decided to go and live with Mama in California. And I finished school out there and graduated out there. When I was about 19, I married John David Wechter, and we had a son, Lacey Drew Wechter, who's now 50 years old. We divorced when Lacey was about 7, and I moved to Oklahoma City. And it was while I was there that I found out the FAA was hiring, and I went down to the government offices, took a test, passed the test, got on a hiring list, and it took a full year, but I finally got hired. I was an air traffic controller. I worked in what they call a flight service station. We did weather briefing, flight planning, search and rescue coordination. We didn't do any actual control of aircraft. We dealt mainly with before they left the ground and after they landed, but they could call us on the radio en route to get weather updates and that sort of thing.
And what about your child?
Of course, he's my pride and joy. He worked for several years after he got out of school at different technical jobs with companies like, he worked for, what was it? One of the cell phone companies. I don't remember offhand right now which one it was. He worked for PayPal. He worked for an insurance company for a while, always doing technical computer stuff. And he kept wanting to get into some kind of business of his own, and he started out buying used books and selling them on eBay. And that has grown. He has a big online business now and just opened his first brick and mortar store. I'd always been home, and I always wanted to come back, and just before my Uncle Bill passed away in early '89, I started talking to him about buying. I wanted a few acres of the old place there where my grandparents' house had stood, and he was considering selling it to me. And then he passed away, and his daughter Mary Ellen offered me one of those deals you can't pass up, to buy the house and 3 acres where I live now. So I bought it late in '89, and I retired in 2000, and by then we had been able to do some upgrades to the house and build the garage building and all of that. And
Now, is that the house your dad built?
Yeah, and the one I live in now.
What kind of interesting things do you do?
I run a thrift store out of the old summer schoolhouse to raise money to repair and save 3 of the old buildings in Summers. We have the schoolhouse, a gymnasium that goes with it, and then the old church. The old church is the oldest of the 3. It was built around 1900. The schoolhouse was started in 1920, and I believe 1936 was the year they built the gymnasium. We've got new roofs on all 3 buildings now. We have new windows in the schoolhouse. We have the floor repaired in the old church, and probably this next year we're going to get new wiring and plumbing in the schoolhouse.
What will you do in the church when you finish and fix it up?
I would like to find another small new church, kind of like the one that got the church down here in Cincinnati. I'd like to find a startup church that would like to rent the building and let it be used for its original intent. But if I can't do that, I think it would make a cute wedding chapel.
And are you part of the history club at Cincinnati?
Yes, I am.
How did you get started in that?
Miss Shirley Spears invited me to come to that, and I loved it. And I had never really thought of myself as being a history buff before that, but I am.
Once I think you told me about the stage route going behind where you live now. Could you tell a little bit about that?
There is an old road bed that goes right through the center of the property from the north edge, and it comes down the hill there, then it turns to the west and goes over to the property line between our property and what's now owned by Jarita Morton. It came down that property line to the fence in front of the house and turned west again out to what was probably the old military road through Summers. And from there it kind of wound around and ended up in Westville. And my grandmother said that the stagecoach used to run along that road. Of course, it's so different now from when I grew up. I don't think anyone would let their kids jump out of the hayloft into a pile of hay. We had so much more freedom in a way than kids have now. No one worried about us getting hurt. We pretty much ran wild. But I wish kids could have that type of childhood again. It wasn't as structured. We didn't have to do lessons during the summer. We didn't have to do phys ed. We didn't have to be on little league ball teams or anything. We had freedom that kids don't have now.
What do you think changed that?
I think working mothers changed a lot, and we were lucky that they could bring us over and we could spend the summer with our mother, or with our grandmother, rather than being put into a program of some type to keep us occupied while mother worked. When I was about 6 years old, my grandfather had had a heart attack and he wasn't able to get out and help Daddy get the hay in. And Daddy, we had an old truck that had compound load. Daddy had me up in the seat, guiding the truck around the hayfield. My brother was down in the floor waiting to hear Daddy yell stop so he could hit the brakes with his hands.
How old were you about then?
I was about 6. David would have been 4.5 to 5. We played Red Rover, we played Duck, Duck, Goose, hide and seek, tag. A little later on in the summer, we would play baseball if we could get enough kids gathered up to at least have 4 or 5 and play workup. After I moved out to California, they had already started having driver's ed out there, and you had to take driver's ed to graduate. So I took driver's ed there and learned to drive, and I never had my own car, but generally I could either borrow Mama's or my stepfather's, and I was, until I got married, I could drive. I was allowed to drive. And then once I got married, it was up to my husband to provide me with a vehicle.
Do you remember what kind of vehicle your family drove?
Mama had, it was a Dodge, and I can't remember the year, but it had push buttons instead of a shift. And then after I got married, my husband bought me a 1958 Chevy. That was like in the early, well, mid-60s. When I was in school, we just hung out in groups, and after I graduated, we moved to Texas, and I met a few girls. We were in a small town outside of Dallas, and we hung out a lot together, and we went bowling, and we went to movies, and we went out and tried to get in trouble every once in a while. And then through them, I met my future husband. We did a Christmas program at the little church in Summers. I remember that just for a couple of years before we moved to Tulsa, but before that I was too young to remember, I think. And they would use the old schoolhouse on Easter for a big community dinner, and then we had a big Easter egg hunt, and those were always fun.